Hi, I'm Alex McGorran and I'm here to talk to you today as a PhD student sponsored by the Fishmongers Company. My talk is called What a Load of Rubbish, and it's about being a biologist who works with plastic pollution. I'm a PhD student working at Royal Holloway University of London and the Natural History Museum. I bet you didn't know that there was researchers at the Natural History Museum, but in fact there are over 200 scientists here. And we also have over 80 million specimens, only a small fraction of which are actually on display to the public. I'm a biologist, meaning I research living organisms. I could have specialised as an ecologist, looking at the interactions between organisms and their environment and each other, or been a zoologist that focuses only on the animals. Similarly, I could have been a botanist, focusing only on plants, or a microbiologist that only looks at microorganisms such as viruses. But as a biologist, I do a little bit of everything. My research is on fish in the estuaries, so I'm more of a marine biologist. So let's take a moment to think, what does a marine biologist mean to you? What is it that you think a marine biologist looks like, and what do they do, and what do they study? So how many of you thought that marine biologists would be working on turtles, whales, sharks and dolphins, or to go scuba diving in the coral reefs? These are all aspects of marine biology, but the vast majority of marine biologists don't actually work on these species. This is Georgina. She works on a fish called smelt. Fun fact, smelt smells like cucumber, so you often smell it in the net before you see it. Georgina is looking at whether there is disease transmission in these species and whether it's fatal to the fish. So her work, like me, focuses on the River Thames. You can see that while she does go out on a boat and do research, a lot of her time is also spent wading through mud and in the lab. This is Dorothy. She looks at microplastics like I do, and similarly, you can see that she spends a lot of time in the lab and on the beach in mud. So it's not always as glamorous as going out to a tropical island somewhere. This is me, and this is me doing my research. I go out on the Thames on a boat to collect fish, and you can see in this bottom right-hand image just how much plastic comes up in the net as well. But most of my time is actually spent in the lab or behind a computer. For my Masters and PhD, I work on the River Thames. This is a really important river of plastic pollution because it passes through London and other major cities. But I work downstream at a place called Erith, where there's a nature reserve or RSPB marshes with waders and other nature, and also a landfill site which has lots of plastic in. To sample the plastic and the animals in the river, I work on a fishing vessel which we take out every 3 months. We sample fish, crabs, shrimp and mud with a device called an Ekman grab. We then take these back to the lab to study. But the nets aren't just full of animals, but lots of plastic, as you saw in the previous images. So it's all about understanding the plastic that's there, the food packaging, the sanitary products and wet wipes, carrier bags, and now we have issues with disposable PPE such as masks and gloves. Some of the plastic we pull from the riverbed is very old. For example, this crisp packet. It has a best before date of the 9th of August 1986. It came from the Thames in 2019, which means it's over 30 years old. In fact, it's older than I am. It goes to show how long plastic lasts on this planet, especially if we don't dispose of it properly. So where does the plastic in the Thames come from? Some of the plastic can be from our streets, such as litter, and it washes down drains. Some is runoff from landfill, and some of it comes from our homes, such as sewage-related debris, which is things flushed down our toilets. In fact, so much plastic is in the Thames that every year 200 tonnes are removed. That's about the same weight as a blue whale. So let's take a look at some of this plastic, shall we? This is Barnes by Hammersmith Bridge. And if we go down to the foreshore, you can see what looks like a muddy bank. But on closer inspection, it's actually full of wet wipes. There's thousands of wet wipes here, and you're just scraping the surface, you can see how much plastic has accumulated. This area is the size of 3 tennis courts, and it truly is full of wet wipes. Some of the plastic in the Thames will make its way out to sea, but other pieces of plastic, such as ghost fishing nets, were discarded at sea and will remain at sea forever. These pieces of plastic catch fish and continue to cause destruction for their entire time in the ocean. And these large macroplastics can even be eaten by wildlife, such as albatrosses, which famously ingest a lot of large plastic. The image on the next slide is quite graphic, so I won't be offended if you look away, and I'll let you know when the image is gone. This is an albatross chick, and you can see that its stomach is full of plastic. There's lots of bottle caps, as well as lighters and other fragments, so plastic can have a really negative impact on the wildlife. So now we're no longer on that image, feel free to look back at the screen. Microplastics are another issue for the Thames, and for the environment in general. These tiny pieces of plastic have been found at the top of Mount Everest, and have been also found at the bottom of the deepest parts of the ocean. They're in the water, in the soil, and in the air we breathe. And that's where researchers like me come in. Throughout my career, I have looked at whales, porpoises, seals, fish, crab, shrimp, and even one turtle to see if they've ingested microplastics. But when I started as an undergraduate, the only thing I really wanted to look at was fish. But unfortunately, collecting the fish in the fishing nets also collected plastic, and I couldn't ignore that problem, as it's a really big part of the fish's story. This image shows an example of just how much plastic can be collected in just one 15-minute trawl along the Thames. You can see there's carrier bags, sanitary pad wrappers, bits of rope, and even pieces of wet wipe. We take up to 10 samples every time we go out, so we could have 10 of these bags of plastic. For my PhD, I'm researching microplastics in the Thames food web, so prey and predators. Microplastics are about 5 millimeters in size, which means they're about the same size as a lentil. Most of the plastic in the Thames are fibres. These come from our clothes, which especially shed fibres in the wash. For every 6 kilogram wash, on average 700,000 fibres are released, and even if most of these are filtered out at wastewater treatment plants, the Thames has a catchment of 15 million people, so it quickly adds up. Crabs in the Thames particularly are affected by plastic. They have big tangles of plastic in their stomach, mostly fibres. So let's take a closer look at some of the plastic we find in the Thames and its animal inhabitants. Starting with this image on the left that has the blue box labelled ossicles. This is a crab stomach photographed under a microscope. Did you know that crabs and many other crustaceans have teeth-like structures, these ossicles, in the stomach? These ossicles grind food, breaking it up, making it easier to digest. Unfortunately, if the crab eats fibres, that grinding motion causes them to knot together into balls, such as the image in the middle. This ball filled the stomach of the crab it was removed from, and it contains over 100 pieces of plastic, mostly fibres. But there's also this yellow fragment. This yellow fragment is elastic, so to work out what it is, we look at some of the large plastic that's in the nets from the trawls. On the right, you can see a piece of balloon with the ribbon still tied around it. Because we know that there's balloon pieces in the Thames, we expect that this yellow elastic film is also a piece of balloon. Whilst plastic pollution is interesting, the purpose of this talk is actually to talk about careers. So I should probably take some time to tell you about how I came to be a PhD researcher at the University of Royal Holloway and at the Natural History Museum. It all started as an undergraduate doing biology. I didn't know what I wanted to be when I completed my undergraduate degree, so I chose to keep it as broad as possible, hence choosing biology over the other specialties I mentioned at the start of this presentation. I could have quite easily picked modules that led me in a different direction, and that's the beauty of going to university to study a degree like biology. If you do choose to go down one route and then start to change your mind, you can just adjust the modules you've picked to end up with a different degree. Undergraduate degrees typically take 3 years in England, but can take 4 years in Scotland. And then the next step, if you want to stay in academia, is to become a master's student. This can be either a master's by science, which is a taught course, or master's by research, which would be a research project. Royal Holloway is a little bit different in that it's a master's by science by research. So it's a taught project, but it's also a research issue. And that's where I started to get independent research experience on plastics. I'd done an undergraduate project, but that is just collecting research in one term and writing it up in a second term. A master's degree lets you spend the whole year just doing your research topic, and the taught elements are more transferable skills and skills that are useful for academics. Because I really enjoyed doing this research, I then continued to do a PhD. This could either be through applying to a university or a funding body directly, or you could go for a doctoral training partnership, which is what I did. These DTPs are a really great way to get a really specific project, but also to meet a lot of really interesting researchers and to try out lots of different research institutions. So the doctoral partnership that I'm part of is the London NERC DTP. This is a 4-year course, and it's made up of 8 or 9 research bodies. And for the first year, you spend 6 months going around each of those universities. They teach you some of the things that they specialise in. You get to talk to the potential supervisors. You go on a really big, amazing field trip. We went to California and we did whale watching and all sorts of amazing science there. And then you get to pick which research project you want, and you can really tailor it to your interests and the interests of the supervisors that you want to be involved. And that's how I ended up doing research in the Natural History Museum as well as at Royal Holloway. But I could have ended up at UCL or at Queen Mary's or King's, depending on who I'd had the interest in working with, which is why these partnerships are so great, because you're not applying to an already established project. So here are my tips for going to university. The first is to be curious. It's okay to ask questions, and it's certainly okay to not know the answer. Asking questions shows that you're passionate and curious and that you want to learn, and often that will come across better than just citing facts out of a textbook. Secondly, networking is really important. It can be really daunting keeping up with all of these connections and meeting new people, but these new people will be the ones that offer you new job opportunities, will have really interesting research projects, and can also help you if you get stuck with certain aspects of whatever research you end up doing. My third and most important point is rejection doesn't equal failure. Unfortunately, rejection is a big part of academia. It's really competitive. I've recently been rejected from 5 jobs, but that doesn't mean my work isn't good. It just means that they weren't the right position for me. And sometimes these rejections can be happy accidents that lead you to a better path that you hadn't considered before. My fourth tip is to learn coding. You don't have to be fluent in coding language, but I think it will really help if you're familiar with it and you've at least seen some of the words and techniques needed. Most statistical analysis in biology is done in a program called R, and take it from me, if you try to learn it at your PhD as you need it, it can be quite a difficult task. So at least seeing it and knowing what it's about beforehand can be really helpful. And lastly, just have fun. University is about discovering yourself as much as it is about learning anything, and really it's about having fun and finding what is passionate for you. So I'm going to start talking now, and I'm going to give you the chance to ask any questions. That can be about going to university, about being a marine biologist, or about plastic pollution. So over to you.